And at 10, what is Charles? Okay, I think we could all agree that Charles isn't an ordinary spider. I think that's pretty obvious. But even by like demon spider train standards, he's not normal. He has colored eggs. He can absorb the energy from those eggs when you attempt to destroy them. And then he has a giant form that is quite literally supposed to be a form from Satan's domain. It's literally called Hell Charles, for God's sakes. Like, how is any of this possible? What could Charles be? Obviously, he's not a demon, because those don't lay eggs. He's not the first of his kind. The stone tablet from the beginning of the game gives that away. There were literal ruins on the island based around these eggs. So, what in the living hell would be the reason for any of this? Of course, the real reason is Charles, but it couldn't have been when these temples were created. This wasn't specifically Charles. So like, what's really going on with this giant train spider demon from hell that isn't actually a demon? And at 9, evacuation. According to Eugene at the start of the game, the island had actually started evacuations after the discovery of Charles, and that he was one of the first ones off the island. But then, apparently, they seemingly stopped evacuations after this. This could have been because of Warren, and I think the game partially hints at that. But my question is, why the hell are these people listening to some mining corporate stooge about leaving these random people who aren't mining workers on the island? Warren interfering or not, what I can only assume is the government not evacuating as many people as they can. What the hell? Why? Plenty of people still want to go back to the mainland. There's one guy even waiting for another boat. Charles apparently destroyed the last one, but has nobody found that suspicious? Has nobody on the mainland thought, huh, that boat isn't back yet, and they aren't answering any of my calls? Maybe something's wrong. No! There's none of that. We have to row with Eugene back to the island. And if it's within rowing distance, why would they think it's taking so long to bring people back? They wouldn't think that. It wouldn't take that long. So what's the deal? What's the deal with airline food? You know I'm a white comedian because I'm making this voice. That's how it works. Comedy. Halfway through into number 5, POG Rocks. The development process for Choo Choo Charles took quite a while, as I'm sure you know. The game grew and grew and grew from its original idea, and 2-Star was streaming parts of the development, which gained some traction. So, in honor of everyone who subbed during those streams, 2-Star added rock towers. Basically, they're like stone cairns, or basically inukshooks, and there's one for each person who is subbed. They're scattered across the island. To quote from 2-Star's Twitter, while playing Choo Choo Charles, you might find some strange rock piles. Each rock is dedicated to someone who subbed during the development live streams I did over the past year. They are POG Rocks. Very epic. So yeah, there you go. Each rock represents a viewer. So that's a nice little Easter egg and a way to get all those fans into the game because they subbed to you and supported, which is always good. Minute 4, unexplained origins. I hinted at this earlier on, but the actual origins of Charles and how he came to be are so freaking confusing. You see, the reason they call him Charles is because that's the name of the mining company run by Warren, the company that uncovered all of the eggs. But it's not because it's his fault that they're calling it that. It's because that's literally the train's branding. Since the trains are to transport materials, the trains are also Warren's. So they're of course branded with the company logo, including our train before we start adding any armor to it. And all the other discarded trains that we find, like in the junkyard where you go to get the lockpick, they also have this branding on them. Charles somehow took control over or became a copy of the trains used by Warren and us while we play. How could that even happen? It's not like a hermit crab situation because Charles's face is on the front of the train. And if it was just a giant spider that was using the train like a shell, his face would like be in the caboose or something, okay? So what the hell is this thing if it took over or even replicated a train? Getting close to the end, in number 3, Hell Charles. So the actual origins of Charles and how he came to be are extremely confusing. You see, the reason they call him Charles is because that's the name of the mining company run by Warren. The guy who's been uncovering the eggs. You know, the one that I just talked about, yellow monkey suit. It's like the man from Curious George and Doug Dimmadome combined. That's basically what I see when I look at him. Yeah, that guy. And that's the name of the company. And they're not calling him that because like they blame him for Charles. It's because that's like the branding on the train. The trains are meant to transport materials, therefore the trains are Warren's and are branded with the company logo, including the train that we're using before we start adding any armor to it and then it gets covered up. And all the other discarded trains we find along the way, like in the junkyard where you get the lockpick and various other other locations like outside of mines. They all have the Charles branding, which implies that Charles somehow took control over or became a copy of the trains used by Warren and used by us as we play. How could that even happen? And then, on top of that, he can absorb the energy from his eggs when they're being destroyed, and when he does do so, he transforms into an even more monstrous version of himself called Hell Charles. What the absolute fuck? This answers none of the questions that I had, it only gives me more. Bro, Hell Charles? But ultimately, in at number 2, secret intentions. One question I had this whole time was if Warren really was planning on digging for gold like he originally was saying. I don't know. Or was it his intention to find Charles and his eggs from the beginning? We can't really be sure. He definitely does seem like he has hidden intentions and like he's not telling us something that he knows. But in a note that you can find in the tall tower when trying to take the miner's contract for the dude who's too fat to climb the tower, that's literally what the plot of the mission is. I don't know how else to say that. You end up finding a journal entry of sorts that mentions how he doesn't think he'll find any gold on this island. Unless he's writing his journals in code, which I don't see why he would be doing. Like, I don't know why this would be a lie. Why would you lie to yourself in your journal, especially if you're leaving it at the tallest tower on the island that nobody should really be able to access because it's falling apart unless they're us because we're seemingly the Dragonborn. But then when we do get to the final battle, he tells us that we'll kill a lot more people than we'll save if we follow through with our plan, but he never says how, he never says why, or he never says how he knows that. His guards also dress up like Charles worshippers. So at this point, I honestly don't know what this man's intentions are, unless the masks are meant to make Charles think that you're one of his babies or something and maybe he doesn't attack you, which is a whole other can of worms that I do not want to mess with today. And finally, in at number 1, extravaganza. The biggest twist of the game comes to us in the final cutscene, after the credits. Much like any movie released nowadays, we get something after the credits that has insane implications. One of those being that there's about 1 million more Charles eggs, and that us destroying those 3 from the actual story means nothing in the grand scheme of things. But this begs the question, what the hell are these for? Okay, we kill Hell Charles, and then we see the 4th egg shaking, and then it pans out and you get like 3,000 more. This gives me multiple questions. 1, why are there so many goddamn eggs? 2, where are these all located? Is this what they were searching for in that unmarked mine by the lighthouse? And if it is, what were they planning on doing with them? Why would they guard those 3 eggs if they knew about the others? And what are all these eggs for? Are they really eggs in like a sense that they'll hatch more Charles? Because like they don't look like spider eggs, but this is also a giant train spider. And we know that this just has happened before, thanks to that stone tablet. So what's the deal with the eggs? Can only one of them be hatched at a time? Can we destroy all of them? I have no idea, and that scares me. In at 10, upgraded wheels. While it may be obvious that your train's visuals change as you increase your armor level, you might have missed the fact that the same is true with the wheels. I thought increasing the speed would just like change the internals, you know, just like upgrade the engine and whatnot. However, this does in fact have a visual impact on the wheels or the treads or whatever they're called when they're on a train. The look changes, but it also is set to like a certain look per level, meaning that if you find your favorite look at level 3, you have to keep it there if you want the best visuals, at least for yourself. But it's definitely a tiny and interesting detail that I appreciate, okay? It's something that I didn't notice until Juicy Fruit Snacks decided to check on the wheels of his train and actually saw them changing. But it's this detail that made me want to do this list. I've been loving the game. I've been loving Choo Choo Charles, man, okay? I love this game. Call me Stardew, because I'm gonna start farming it. In at 9, Charles Origins. Now this is something that I noticed that a couple other people that I watched play the game also picked up on. However, I don't think many people really got as interested by it as I did. Our train has Charles's branding on it, okay? You see, the reason they call him Charles is because that's the name of the mining company run by Warren, the guy who uncovered all the eggs and all of that. And it's not because like it's his fault and that's why they're calling it Charles, but it's literally the train branding. Since the trains are to transport materials, the trains are Warren's. So of course they're going to be branded with the company logo, including our train before we start adding any armor to it. And all the other discarded trains that we can find like in junkyards and whatnot, like the one where you get the lockpick, they have that logo too. Charles somehow seemingly took control over or became a copy of the trains used by Warren and us while we play. Like, how could that even happen? It's definitely not a hermit crab situation because Charles's face case, is on like the front of the train. And then when he gets killed after like the whole Hell Charles fight, the spike goes deep into that head of his, alright? Like, I don't know, it's weird that we ourselves are also fighting Charles in a Charles. Yikes. And it ain't hidden. You can actually hide from Charles, believe it or not. I personally didn't think that this was possible, but whenever you hear the train whistle, that just means that Charles is nearby and on the prowl. But if he doesn't actually see you and lock onto you, he just won't automatically know where you are. Meaning that hiding behind a tree can actually help if you're away from your train in the forest and Charles is zooming around nearby. Or that hiding in a house is actually a viable strategy for if you're away from your train. At a certain point, Charles will give up, but he will be more likely to come after you again soon, which I think is actually pretty dope. I figured that it would just be like a randomized time between attacks and then that's when he comes after you, but it's actually a little more juicy than that, and that's something that deserves hella respect, okay? Gavin didn't have to add that. It could have just been random times between attacks, or hell, it could have just been a set length of time and we wouldn't have bat an eye, especially given that it was just the one guy making this and the playtime of the game might have been extended this way. But they put in far more effort than needed, and that's incredible. Mans has damn well earned that like 90 grand he's made off the games by now. It's at least 90 grand, that's for damn sure. It is 7 island location. We also don't know where Arcanerum is located. It's closer to the mainland than most might assume, since after all we do row there with Eugene, but other than that we get basically no information towards where this game actually takes place. In like a map world geography sense. Not like we know it's Aranerum, but like we don't know where in the world the island would be. I could probably figure it out, but this is a top 10 list and I don't have that kind of time. So if I'm gonna do that, I'll have to save it for another video, and let me know if you actually want to see something like that in the comments. I have some ideas about how I could figure it out, but if you don't want the video, I'm not gonna force it on you and I'm not gonna force myself to do it. But yeah, other than we know it's within rowing distance of a mainland, that's all we have. Well, okay, we know it's within rowing distance for a father who is trying to make sure his son doesn't get killed by a giant demon train spider, so I think that it'll be a little further than your average Joe, or average Eugene in this case. Dare I say. I feel like a Joe would be able to row further than a Eugene though. I don't know. Like in my head, that's my opinion. Depends on the Joe though. Hey, that rhymed. And at 6, our origins. Something that I also was wondering while playing this game and made jokes about multiple times was, what the hell is a museum curator doing hunting a giant demon train spider? Okay, like the game, through Eugene, tells us at the beginning that we're trying to keep our museum in business and looking for something big to do it. We don't know what kind of museum we run, and I'm sure most people would assume that it's a monster museum of sorts, considering how he's like, oh yeah, this will be the biggest thing you have ever seen. But if it was a monster museum, firstly, that would never be close to going out of business, okay? Kids would be dragging their parents there all the time. If Ripley's Believe It or Not is still going and like has like a museum in Niagara Falls, a museum about monsters would be fine. And Eugene specifically asks if we're ready for monster hunting, which would imply it's something that we haven't done before. If it was our job, well, of course we would be ready. It's our job, but we seemingly aren't. We then also get referred to as a monster hunter multiple times by NPCs, but we're also referred to as the museum guy. So it's really hard to tell what exactly it is that we do. Plus, depending on your playstyle, you're fine with just straight up killing Warren's guards. I mean, this is justified as self-defense, but it's still taking someone's life, and you're also probably using a giant bazooka to do it. Speaking of which, my favorite weapon is the bazooka, by the way, and if you made it halfway through this list so you can actually see that, be sure you hit like and subscribe, because we're gonna be doing more Choo Choo Charles things, because y'all are loving it. That last video did really well. In it for Warren. Warren himself is really confusing to me as well, honestly, okay? Like, I don't think anyone has actually seen him before the final cutscene when I've watched people play. I didn't see him before the final cutscene. Where did he come from? Okay, how did he check on the temple that he'd assume is well guarded just as we're about to put the third egg into the shrine thing? Like, maybe he had heard about the egg thefts from the mines, sure, but if that was the case, he would have just upped the security at the temple to make sure that he didn't get put in a position where he had to convince someone that he'd never met before and has been told all sorts of horrific things about him that he's right to guard the eggs. Cause if that was me in that situation and like actually in that world not playing the game and I had the choice, or even if I was just playing the game and it gave me the choice to listen or to use the egg, damn straight I would have destroyed the eggs. I was told nothing but bad and suspicious things about Warren the entire game. I never saw him once. Only at that final cutscene did I ever see him, and if he was in the actual world, he would have stuck out like a sore thumb otherwise. Cause this man was dressed in a full yellow suit with a cowboy hat, like a discount Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome. So how does he just show up out of nowhere, think that he'll convince us, and then die in a very evident way like it was supposed to be some big story moment? Like, sure, the secondary antagonist is dead, hooray, but like, why does that matter if we're about to kill Charles anyway? I don't know, it's a whole lot of weird going on here. I don't know what his plan was. In at 3, Barry. Okay, so the mission where you have to bring that witch, the fish, like for her stew and whatever, then you have to be careful going through the swamp because of Barry. That has to be a Minecraft reference, right? Is that just me? I mean, like, it's a witch with her cauldron in a swamp with her hut being over the swamp on stilts, and it is a very boxy house. Alright, it feels like it has to be a Minecraft reference. You see, I was kind of iffy on this. I wasn't quite sure when I stumbled upon it in my original playthrough of the game, but then I read the recipe for her stew and saw that there was dirt in there, and that combined with the fact that Barry the monster looks very much like a realistic form monster mutant version of the Minecraft squid kind of sealed the deal in my brain. Like, it has to be a Minecraft reference, right? There's no way that this many things lined up and it wasn't intentional. This isn't FNAF. That's not a FNAF game. But ultimately, in at number 2, range. Okay, so this is something else that I've mentioned previously. However, the idea of range in this game only applies to 3 weapons. The base machine gun that comes with the train, the bug spray, and Bob. However, the rocket launcher says that it has low range, but honestly, if you have a rocket launcher, you can do any outdoor section of the game easily. You can do like what I did for the final temple, and I was letting them rockets fly. The explosion will not only kill enemies if they're close enough to it, but will also alert the other ones who can't actually see you to where you are, which will draw them towards the train and then allow for you to just pick them off easily, even if you're not using the rocket launcher. So if you wanted to like forego and ignore parts of the stealth that are outside, you can do that by just spamming infinite rockets. Plus, it's fun to spam infinite rockets. Like, they say they have horrible range, but like just like with arrows, rocks, or anything that like you're throwing or whatever, if you aim it up, the parabola, I remember that from grade 11 math, the parabola will help them fly further than just going straight. But also, I failed grade 11 math, so I can't really be sure. Okay, the range in this case is at least, it's only referring to when you fire it straight. And finally, in at number 1, all dolled up. Up around the northeast section of the island, there is a little like area within the track lines that contains another Easter egg that I've talked about on another list. But on the left half of this section, there is an area that is just filled with dolls. Okay, and I mean like I filled. This whole section of slightly forested area looks like it was ripped straight out of a bad Riverdale episode. Okay, the dolls were hanging from trees, they were hanging from ropes, there was like stuffed animals nailed to trees and like hanging by like nooses around their necks with open fire that's just there, that is still somehow lit, meaning that people were there recently but not there when you get there, especially because like it can be raining when you walk here. So yeah, there's no explanation for it. I have no idea what it could be. Maybe it's a reference to the island of dead dolls in Mexico, which is just basically, it's an island full of dolls that are hanging from trees and buildings, and they're covered in cobwebs and insects, and it was named in the 1950s when the dolls started randomly appearing, or at least that's what they say. But I mean, either way, okay, maybe it's just a place that the residents have shrines to the children they've lost to Charles, since there's no kids on the island, which is weird given how many fun singles there are on that island, like Pickle Lady. And 10, supernatural. The possibility of Charles being some form of supernatural entity isn't lost on me, okay? I mean, this thing is a train with giant spider legs sticking out of its body and a face. Plus, you know, the whole 2 other monsters on the island thing, including a Kirkland brand Slenderman flying ghost. And I mean, like, come on, how else are you supposed to get a giant spider that's shaped like a train? I really don't know what else could turn itself into something else. Like, I don't know anything else that could change its shape. Unless maybe it's like a demon that's just picked 2 of the worst things on the planet. Spiders are the worst thing on the planet, but then like the Thomas stands are even worse than the FNAF ones. So yeah, like, wasn't there a whole Facebook group against this game? Or did I imagine that? That might have just been a dream. But either way, the whole shapeshifter demon angle makes sense given what we're dealing with, okay? As long as it's not like a supernatural shapeshifter, like the show kind of thing, where they can only change into humans, and I think that's a thing, right? Is that a thing? I feel like it is. But I don't know, maybe the archivist that we play as is Another Earth's Sam Winchester who doesn't want kale. And at 9, hermit crab. Okay, when I originally proposed this idea, I said that it couldn't be a hermit crab situation with Charles because Charles's face is on the front of the train. And then when he gets killed after the Hell Charles fight, the spike goes deep into his face. However, I guess that if the train the creature inhabited had the like internals removed and it was just like the exterior shell, it could be possible that Charles could have inhabited an existing train, but then that would also imply that this guy has quite the long noggin, like a horse. Why the long face? Since, you know, that spike goes deep in and then it continues to force more and more blood out as it goes. So it makes me think that there is more to this than just some being crawling into a broken husk. It would also mean that Charles' original form would look just like the Thomas meme, where, you know, where like the head's coming out of its body and it looks like the most cursed snake of all time, which honestly, it would make sense. And at 8, hatching. Now, the interesting thing about the ending is that while yes, there are more eggs, none of them had hatched, at least until after this Charles is dead. So my question is, what's the deal? Okay, like, what's the deal with airline food? God, I sounded weird. Why is it that these eggs aren't hatching until after Charles is dead? And why is it that seemingly only one spider is able to exist at a time? My thinking is that maybe the release of energy is what makes these eggs hatch, since I think in the game they mention that Charles didn't show up until they started destroying eggs, and then as they continued he got into his Hell Charles form at one point, and then that's when Warren stopped. But if Charles didn't show up until the eggs were destroyed, and we don't see another egg move until we destroy them again, maybe that's hinting at the giant beam in the sky being a source of power that can cause the eggs to hatch. Or it just started hatching because it sensed that the current incarnation had died, kind of like a horrific rebirth cycle. But that would also be kind of weird. But I guess it would make more sense, and it could explain other things that I'll get to in a minute. Just stay with me. And at 7, Charlie the Choo Choo. Now, this is certainly an interesting story, because I could have sworn the name of this game was Choo Choo Charlie. It was like my own personal Mandela effect. But when looking into things for this video, I learned of Charlie the Choo Choo, a children's book by Stephen King, of all people. Yeah, that's right, Stephen King wrote a children's book. Charlie the Choo Choo is from the world of the Dark Tower, and it's a children's book in that universe, but published in ours under the name Beryl Evans. The story was written by Stephen King and published in King's previous novel, The Dark Tower 3: The Wastelands, wherein the book is found by Jake in chapter 22. The story is intended to be creepy and to give children nightmares, which personally I think makes a hell of a lot of sense, since this game also seems to be trying to do the same. In the book, Charlie gets abandoned by his engineer Bob in favor of a better model, and there's even a picture of Charlie crying dark, oily tears and is like being rusted. He then gets repaired by Bob, but what if he didn't? Or is that the train we use in the game instead? Because remember, the guy who was making the railgun was named Bob, and he couldn't come back to repair the train because he got killed. So, is this Bob that Bob? Halfway through into number 5, quick equip. This is helpful if you're trying to make your way to your train in a rush. Whether it be because you got spotted by Warren's goons or because Charles just decided to show up out of nowhere, maybe it can be hard to get up the ladder, especially when you're panicking. So, what if I told you that you didn't actually have to? yeah, you can get on the train by clicking on the gun from the ground. Whatever weapon you have equipped, it doesn't really matter. You can actually mount it from the ground if you're close enough to the train. So if Charles is making it a living hell to get onto your ladder, or the goons are chasing you and you're actually at the back of your train or something like that, hop on the gun and just mow them down, okay? Give those goons hell, Charles. Or you can just like dismount it again right after that and hit the gas. But either way, it's another way to get on the train if you ever need it, or if you just don't want to use a ladder, because I get that. In at 4, Ducky Momo. At the northernmost part of the island, the peak in the northwest corner around where you can get the blue paint, there's a small little beach. On your way there you can run into some cultists, but if you manage to not die on your way, you'll find a giant yellow rubber duck just floating off the coast, around 40 meters offshore. It's certainly an interesting detail, since not only is it a giant rubber duck, but it's also somehow not moved at all, despite there being a storm that's going on and off while you're on the island, and you know, it being an ocean. Of course, this doesn't have to make sense though, because it's a video game about a giant train spider demon thing that absorbs energy from its own eggs. But given all the other odd things happening on the island, who knows what it could be? Maybe it's another monster, maybe it's some like kaiju being that has extremely long legs and it's really just standing in the ocean, because that would be hilarious. Maybe it's secretly the actual Choo Choo Charles iceberg, but like just a duck on top instead of that part of the iceberg. I don't know, alright? Maybe it's a reference to something that I'm not getting. Maybe it is a reference to Ducky Momo. Maybe it's a reference to Bendy and the Dark Revival, because there's a duck in that game. I don't know, alright? Is this a gaming reference? If you have if you know, let me know in the comments. Getting close to the end, into number 3, Hell on Earth. Earth in Hell is more accurate. You see, this doesn't seem like anywhere that would reasonably exist on any Earth, okay? Like, I get that it's an island, and it's not close to anywhere major, but also there's no goddamn way the world's military does not know about Charles, okay? If you have as much juice as an olive on a plate, the US is going to invade it a la Gordon Ramsay, so how would they not have seen this island, and then like investigated it, and then just left it? No, not with a giant demon train spider running around. That would have been the next damn target for any form of weapons test, and they wouldn't have cared about anyone on the island. My thinking is that given that this is a giant train spider that seemingly comes out of nowhere, including the fact that the settlers have the means to stop him, then aren't doing shit about it because somehow you're the only one who's willing to, and the fact that this is an island, meaning that if you get off of it, you're probably gonna have to kill him just so you can get into your boat in peace, that this could just be a simulated world space and you're actually in hell. Whether it's like a Dante's Inferno situation, or maybe it's kind of like Crowley trying to get the demon tablet out of Kevin in Supernatural, I can't really be sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point 2-Star reveals that this is just one of the many layers of hell, and then finally someone, that being us, decided to rebel, or maybe we play as Satan, who just wants to see if we can get anyone to do anything for themselves, but that also discounts the fact that we have to get to the island. And a 10 out of bounds. There are multiple locked doors throughout Choo Choo Charles. Sometimes you have to find the key to unlock it, other times it's a door to someone's house, so you really can't unlock it. But there's also one door in particular that is not only creepier than the others, but also isn't unlockable ever at all, and it's not even someone's house. Up on the northeastern area of the island, off the track, you can find a cabin surrounded by a moat of spikes, no doubt to deter Charles. However, in this cabin there's a mask for one of the cultists hanging on a bedpost, and a gate leading towards a creepy basement. The basement for most players simply contains 7 scrap. However, there is a locked door here as well. While I personally ignored this while playing, thinking that I'd be brought back here at some point, I never was, because behind that door is actually just a room that contains a note, and the note, should you read it, simply says you shouldn't be in here, because, you know, you shouldn't. It's out of bounds. You would have had to cheat to get here. I would have personally liked a you're not supposed to be in in here joke as a reference to Skyrim, given the many other video game references in this game, but it's still cool nonetheless, and it's kind of funny, and if you're a cheater, then it calls you out for it. Yellow duck. At the northernmost part of the island, the peak in the northwest corner, there's a small little beach there. On your way off the track, because you know you gotta run here, you can run into some cultists, but should you manage to make it the whole way without dying, you'll find a giant yellow rubber duck floating off the coast around 40 meters out. This is certainly an interesting Easter egg since it's not only a giant rubber duck, but it's also somehow staying still despite there being a storm and it being, you know, floating in the ocean. Those two things combined should have sent it miles away. Of course, this doesn't have to make sense. It's a freaking video game about a giant demon train spider, but given all the other odd things happening on the island, maybe this is just another monster. Maybe the reason this thing isn't moving is because it has extremely long legs that are keeping it in place. And based off their reaction to Charles, maybe the duck is too scared to actually reveal itself. Or maybe it's a reference to something that I'm just not understanding. Like, is there a duck in Thomas the Tank Engine? Or like, is this another gaming reference? Is it a reference to that TikTok where someone dropped big rubber duck in a river and then had to go find it later? I don't know. Okay, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And it ate first priority. When I was playing the game, my first priority was upgrading my train's armor rating. I knew that this was going to be my game plan going in, but when I figured out that 1 scrap was required for 10% of your train repairs, it was an even better plan. I watched Eddie VR play it on his second channel and he neglected armor, and it was getting him wrecked. So even in retrospect, I knew I had made the right call, but what I didn't realize was how insane that made my train rate off the bat. You see, I figured that if I didn't have to repair the train as often, then the damage in the end wouldn't really matter, or at least my damage rating. So I could focus on armor, and then I kept the speed and damage leveling together, so when it came to the fights with Charles, I could take some more hits before needing to repair, meaning that I could focus on damaging and working out a combat strategy. If I could at least keep pace with Charles so it was harder for him to catch up with me, and have my armor up at the same time, the lower damage I was dealing wouldn't really matter, since there is infinite ammo for the guns, and my train never ran out of fuel. So I could just keep going and I could chip away slowly at his health if I needed to. But keeping armor up and then pairing the speed and damage was so insane, I actually ended up chasing Charles. I quite literally beat him and then went after him because I wasn't done with him yet. I was heated.
Get back here! I'm not done with you yet! Get back here, Shocker! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
And it's 7 alien. There's also the possibility of us not understanding Charles because he's not from this world. And in a more literal sense than you would be expecting, unless you were paying attention to the title of this number, because then you'd know. Charles, or the giant spider species that he hails from, could simply be a race of alien that landed on this island ages ago and then were wiped out by whatever tribe was here. And then, much like how people assume the pyramids were made by aliens or like in an effort to worship aliens, they could have made the temple structures that we find throughout the island. They could have had a whole culture or religion surrounding the species until they were turned on or until the humans fought back, which would explain why Charles isn't just roaming around when Warren gets there and he has enough time to actually set up shop. Plus, I mean, aliens is an easy way of explaining anything in this sense. You know, the eggs, the ancient magical technology, why Charles is able to absorb the energy from those eggs. Like, hell, the original aliens could have made the humans build that temple so that they could absorb the power from their own eggs and become stronger, and then they rebelled because they're like, hell no, we're not gonna let this happen. Who knows? Halfway through into number 5, Island Origins. Now, okay, Charles isn't the only weird thing on this island, because like, not only is there a giant demon spider train that's attacking people, but there also seems to be active measures against Charles on the island, and it's there when they arrive. It's not like Warren and his goons built the temple or all the structures they were digging for, so why did whoever was here before build all of this? Clearly, they've had to fight off a being like this before, thanks to that drawing on the tablet. So what happened that caused the island to be abandoned or extinct enough that Warren wouldn't think twice about starting his operation here, and he had enough time before Charles actually showed up to set up shop? And also, if this worked, okay, that also wouldn't make sense, because they would have had to fail in order for Charles to show up, but clearly they didn't fail because they fought off the original spider and Warren had enough time, unless Charles was like laying dormant for ages until they unearthed his eggs. But then again, why would he have showed up looking like a train that was used by the mining company? I don't know. My original theory when I was actually playing the game was that the island itself was possessed by an evil entity that Warren was using to make his fortune, kind of like a Betrayal at House on the Hill sort of thing, since in that board game the house that you're playing in is possessed by evil. But that seems to not be the case anymore, because again, there was like 1 million eggs. So yeah. In a forced cycle. This could also have just been horrible timing. You see, since we know that this has happened before thanks to that stone tablet from the lockpicking mission, we know that there should have been a spider on this island when Warren got here. But there wasn't. This could be for any number of reasons, like maybe the original inhabitants fought it off, maybe it got killed by Barry or Slender Man, maybe since they built it, the original humans knew how to use the main temple to kill the beast instead of, powering him up, and maybe the spider wiped out the original humans on the island and then starved because it ran out of food. We can't really be sure, but it could just be that there's also a cycle to these attacks. You see, the egg starting to shake right after Charles was killed doesn't sit right with me, okay? There's no way that's a coincidence. And that got me thinking, why would it hatch right after Charles died? And what would it hatch into? A spider or a spider train? Would it hatch into a little baby? Or would it hatch and then instantly start growing because it absorbed its own energy? And that's when it dawned on me. What if every time a spider dies, a new one is born? And the only reason Charles attacked was because it was released after spending decades, if not longer, in that last cave. Alright, there are train tracks in the cave with all the eggs, so Warren must have seen it, which could explain why he was protecting these three. But what if killing Charles only bought them another 50 or 100 years? And soon enough, our great-grandson will have to be back on Aranirum just to do it all again. Getting close to the end in number 3, Slender. If you remember back in like 2012 when Slender the 8 pages was all the rage, you're gonna love Choo Choo Charles, because whether or not you got a chance to play it back then, you can play it in this game. Well, kinda. One of the optional side missions involves you having to grab half of the paranormal pages left in a nearby boulder field. You see, this woman has been finding 16 pages pinned to lampposts in that area for multiple nights in a row. But last night she was halfway through gathering them up when she was scared off by horrible noises and strange visions. She no longer feels safe walking out there, despite, a giant train spider also attacking the island for the past little bit, which I feel like is the more unsafe option. I don't know why you ever felt safe out there to begin with if there's a giant frickin' train spider, but that's aside the point. Being the monster hunter, museum curator thing guy that you are, and with the offer of scrap metal, you go and grab those 8 pages while being chased by some form of pitch black creature with a white glow that's always flying at you, has a mini tornado under them, and if they catch you, you get teleported. So yeah, it's legally distinct, but definitely a reference to one of the most iconic YouTube horror games of all time. And ultimately, in at number 2, Altars. Now, I thought that there was more to this game than there was, okay, I really did, specifically because there are 3 random pillars or altars that you can find around the map. One of them is across from the final temple, another is by the house with the locked door that calls you out for cheating that I mentioned at the beginning, and another is closer to the middle of the island. My thinking was that 3 altars seemed to be the perfect size to have eggs right in the middle without them falling off. 3 eggs, I must be able to get a secret or some other cool ability by placing the eggs on these altars before I take them to the final fight. No, these don't do anything. You can't interact with them, they don't have anything around them that does anything, nothing. It's set up perfectly, there's 3 of them. It's set up so well, but there is a note at the one across from the final temple that I thought might possibly give me the way to do this, but no. Instead, it starts talking about some other entity, Gus the Bus, but it's just random ravings. Quote, beware the bus, his name is Gus. He's not on the island though, so don't worry too much. When you go back to the mainland, don't ride the bus. Gus bus, bust the Gus. He's bad and fast. Charles fears Gus. Bro, what? I thought that this was gonna be like something insane, but it's just a crazy guy talking about a bus demon. And finally, in at number 1, secret ending. Now, I originally thought that there was a secret ending to the game while I was playing, because there were a load of videos saying things like Choo Choo Charles all endings or all boss fights, but there doesn't seem to be, okay? That's why I was investigating those pillars I mentioned in the last number. I thought that they were also a key to a secret ending, but it seems like there's only the one ending that doesn't doesn't include your death. Yeah, there's also no hidden achievements or any normal achievements about another ending either, but there is one for the main ending. So I'm gonna use all of that information to work out that I was wrong there. But there really seems like there could have been, especially given the end credit scene of all those thousands of eggs that were colors we didn't even collect. I figured that there would be a secret better ending where we could destroy all of those, but apparently there's not. So there you go. If you're wondering about it, like I was, I promise you that there is no secret ending, unfortunately. Unless you're watching this a while later, and since then the game has been updated and added one.